Said I was throwing my life away. My mother said it the way she says everything, calmly, like she was reading a verdict off a legal pad. No raised voice, no tears, just that flat, certain tone she uses in the courtroom when she's already decided you're wrong and she's simply informing you of the fact. You're not serious, Hazel. This isn't a career. This is a phase, and I will not fund a phase. I remember looking down at my hands. I had a callus on my right index finger from using a stylus for 8 months straight. I'd been building something real. But standing in our kitchen in Raleigh, under those recessed lights my father had installed himself the summer I turned 12, I felt about 6 years old. Get your priorities straight, she said, or get out. She meant it. I got out. Here's what nobody tells you about growing up in a house where both parents are professionals. It's not that they're cruel. My mother is not a cruel woman. She's a physician. 30 years of practice, chief of internal medicine at a hospital that has her name on a wing. My father spent his career as a corporate attorney before he retired. They built something real, respected, solid, and they looked at me, their youngest, their only daughter, and saw someone squandering a gift. I had gotten into UNC's pre-med program. Full ride. My mother cried at the kitchen table the day the acceptance letter came. My father opened a bottle of Bordeaux he'd been saving for 12 years. What they didn't know, what I hadn't figured out how to tell them, was that I'd already decided I wasn't going. I wanted to build apps, not games, not anything flashy. I wanted to build tools. Specifically, I'd spent the last 18 months building a workflow app for independent healthcare providers, solo practitioners who were drowning in scheduling, billing, patient communication, all of it. I'd seen the problem up close because I'd spent every summer since I was 15 volunteering at my mother's hospital. I knew the pain point. I knew what was missing. And I'd built a version of something that could fix it. I had a working beta. I had 11 users, actual users, not friends, not family. Real practitioners who had found me through a Reddit thread and started using my app and kept using it. I tried to tell my mother this. I showed her the app on my laptop one evening in April. She looked at it the way she looks at things she doesn't understand, with polite, impatient skepticism. Hazel, anyone can make an app. Mom, these are real users. They're paying. Small amounts, but how much? About $400 a month right now, but the growth. She stood up from the table. Discussion over. That was March. By June, after 2 more conversations that went nowhere, she handed me an ultimatum. Accept the UNC offer, or she and my father would stop supporting me entirely. No tuition for anything else, no rent help, no health insurance under their plan. I was 22. I said okay. She looked at me for a long moment and then said, I hope you know what you're doing. She did not sound hopeful. My brother, he's 4 years older than me, works in finance in Charlotte, called me the night I moved out. He didn't yell, he's not a yeller. He's more like my mother in that way, measured, precise. You could have just gone to UNC and worked on your app on the side, you know. I tried to explain to them what I'm building. They don't. They're scared for you. Hazel. I know. Dad hasn't said this out loud, but he's really hurt. I sat on the floor of my new apartment, a 700-square-foot place in Durham that smelled faintly of the previous tenant's cigarettes. And I held the phone against my ear and I didn't say anything for a long moment. I love them, I said finally. But I know what this is, and I can't walk away from it. He sighed. The kind of sigh that carries a whole speech inside it. Call me if you need anything, he said. He meant it. That mattered more than I could say. The next 14 months were the kind of hard that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. I had a part-time job at a medical billing company, which sounds bleak, but it was actually useful. I spent 40 hours a week watching exactly the kind of chaos I was trying to solve. I took notes. I asked questions. I went home at night and opened my laptop and kept building. My social life contracted to almost nothing. I had one friend I'd kept from high school, a woman named Petra, who worked remotely for a tech company out of San Francisco and understood what I was doing, even when nobody else did. She would come over on Sunday afternoons and we'd sit in my little living room and she'd do her work and I'd do mine and we'd order Vietnamese food and it was the closest thing to peace I had during that stretch. The app was not going well. My 11 users had grown to 34, but growth had stalled. I'd hit a wall I didn't know how to get through. The interface was clunky. The billing integration was a mess. One of my early users, a family practice doctor in Asheville, sent me a long, kind email explaining why she was canceling. She'd found another solution that was easier to use. I read that email 4 times. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while. I almost quit. I want to be honest about that. There was one night in November, about 10 months in, when I did the math on my bank account and my monthly expenses and gave myself about 6 weeks before I'd have to make a decision. I called my brother and talked around the edges of the conversation without actually saying what I was thinking. He could tell. "What do you need?" he said. "I don't know yet." "You're not done yet," he said. "You'd know if you were done." I went to sleep and I woke up at 4 in the morning with an idea I'd never had before. I got up and started writing. What I understood, finally, was that I'd been building the app for the wrong user. I'd been thinking about the doctor, but the person who touched scheduling software 12 times a day wasn't the doctor. It was the office manager, the person answering phones, fielding cancellations, managing the calendar, chasing insurance reimbursements at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning, while also trying to explain a bill to a patient who was standing at the counter and already frustrated. I rebuilt the entire interface around that person, not the doctor. The office manager. It took 7 months. I kept my billing job. I slept less than I should have. I ate poorly. I had a whiteboard in my bedroom that my landlord would have hated if he'd seen it because I'd written directly on the wall with dry erase markers. I shipped the new version on a Thursday in June. By the following Tuesday, I had 9 new signups. By the end of the month, 41. I reduced my hours at the billing company. By October, I quit entirely. My user base grew steadily, not virally, not explosively, just steadily. Over the next year, small practices, multi-physician groups, a regional urgent care chain in Tennessee that took a meeting with me and then signed a contract that made me sit in a parking garage for 20 minutes because I needed to be somewhere private when I cried. I had a health tech accelerator reach out to me in the spring. I flew to Austin for 3 days. I came home with a term sheet. I did not call my parents. I want to be clear, I was not being vindictive. I genuinely did not know how to make that call. What would I say? "Hi, Mom. Remember when you told me to get out? Turns out the app is doing well." I had rehearsed versions of that conversation in my head for 2 years, and none of them landed right. I also wasn't ready to open that door. I was still somewhere in the middle of a very long exhale. I needed to finish breathing out before I could take anything else in. My brother knew roughly how things were going. He'd ask, casually, when we talked. I'd give him honest but spare answers. Good, growing, figuring it out. He didn't push. My parents and I exchanged text messages on birthdays and at Christmas. Brief, careful, correct. My mother texted me on my birthday, "Thinking of you today. Hope you're well." My father sent a photo of the backyard garden, no message. I sent back a picture of a sunset from a work trip to Raleigh, no message. We were fluent in the language of not saying things. The acquisition happened on a Tuesday in March, 18 months after the accelerator investment. I had been in conversations with a health technology company for 9 months. I will not use their name here. They are a legitimate company with a good product, and they made a fair offer, and the process was handled professionally. But I'll tell you the number because I think you should hear it. $11.4 million. Net, after fees and taxes, I walked away with a little over $7 million. I was 31 years old. I remember my attorney, a woman in her 50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the driest sense of humor I have ever encountered, sliding the final documents across the conference table and saying, completely flat, "Congratulations. You're annoyingly young to have done this." I laughed. It came out wrong, too high, a little strangled. She pushed a box of tissues across the table and went back to her notes. I bought a house in Asheville 6 months later. Asheville was intentional. The family practice doctor who had sent me the kind cancellation email years earlier, the one that almost broke me, was in Asheville. I had stayed in touch with her loosely. She had actually come back to the app 2 years after she'd left, after the rebuild, and she'd become one of my most enthusiastic users. I wanted to be in a city with mountains and good coffee and people who were doing real things. Asheville had all of that. The house is a craftsman, built in the 1920s, on a street with oak trees that are so old and large they've started lifting the sidewalk. It has a porch that wraps around the front, original hardwood floors, a kitchen I gutted and rebuilt myself over 6 months, and a back garden that I have only recently stopped killing things in. I paid $2.9 million, cash. I am not telling you this to be impressive. I am telling you because I want you to understand what I had built and what I had walked away from building when I was standing in my mother's kitchen at 22 with a callus on my finger. And she told me to get serious. My father called me in September, about 8 months after I bought the house. I saw his name on my phone, and I held it for 2 full rings before I picked up. "Hi, Dad. Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded older. I don't know if it actually was, or if I had just been bracing for this long enough that I heard things in it that weren't there. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You're not." There was a pause. My father is not a man who pauses. He is precise and deliberate, and he chooses his words carefully, but he doesn't pause. The pause told me something. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said. "We owe you a conversation." I sat down on my porch. The oak leaves had started to turn. "Okay," I said. What came next was not a perfect apology. My father is a corporate attorney by training, and even in his most vulnerable moments, he sounds a little like he's issuing a statement. He acknowledged that they had handled things badly. He said they'd been operating out of fear, and that fear had made them rigid. He said he had been watching from a distance. My brother had kept him loosely in form, and he was proud of me. Proud came out of him like he had to push it through something to get it out. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was looking at the street. A kid was riding a bike. Someone down the block was doing yard work. Life going on, indifferent to the fact that my father had just said a word to me that I had not heard from him in 9 years. "I appreciate that," I said. We talked for 40 minutes. It was not a reconciliation, not exactly. It was the beginning of something that would take a lot longer than one phone call, but it was real. Both of us were actually in it. My mother called the following week. Her version was shorter and more formal, and she chose every word like she was performing surgery. But she called. She said, "I underestimated what you were capable of, and I'm sorry for the way I said what I said." That was not a small thing for her. I know her well enough to know what it cost her. "Thank you, Mom," I said. "Are you happy?" The question surprised me. She rarely asks about happiness. She asks about health, about plans, about practical things. "Yeah," I said, "I am." They drove up to Asheville in October. I had not seen either of my parents in 3 years. My father looked the same, but with more gray. My mother wore a coat I'd never seen, and looked, somehow, slightly smaller than I remembered, not in a diminished way, just in the way of a person you've kept very large in your mind for a long time, and then you see them in an actual doorway. I gave them a tour of the house. My mother ran her hand along the original crown molding in the living room and said, "This is beautiful, Hazel." It was the most uncomplicated sentence she had said to me in years. We had dinner at a restaurant in the River Arts District. We talked about my brother's kids, about the hospital, about a trip my parents were considering taking to Portugal. Ordinary things. I kept waiting for the conversation to tip into something harder, but it didn't. Walking back to the car, my mother took my arm. Just briefly. She said, "I should have listened better." 6 words. But she meant them. They went home, and I stood on my porch in the dark after they left, listening to the neighborhood settle into the evening. Somewhere up the street, a dog was barking at something. A car passed slowly. The oak trees just held still the way they always do. All that rootedness, all that patience. I thought about the version of me who had sat on the floor of a cigarette-smelling apartment in Durham at 22, holding a phone, trying to explain to my brother that I wasn't quitting. I knew what I was doing. I just needed time. I didn't cry. I'd done the crying earlier, in other rooms, in other years, and it was spent. What I felt standing on that porch was something quieter. Not satisfaction. Satisfaction is too clean, too resolved. More like the feeling of having made it through weather. There's something I say sometimes when people ask me how I did it. They mean the business, the app, the acquisition, the number. But the real answer is that none of it had anything to do with genius or luck or timing, though all of those things played a role. It had to do with the fact that I knew what I was building, and I kept building it even when the people who were supposed to believe in me had decided they didn't. That's the part they don't teach you. You can love people completely and still not let their doubt become yours. I learned that in a Durham apartment, on a floor that needed better cleaning, with a phone pressed to my ear and absolutely no idea what was coming next, I'm glad I stayed on that floor. I'm glad I stayed with the work. I built a life out of the thing they told me to get serious about. I got serious about it. That's the whole story. I've thought a lot about what actually happened, not just to me, but between me and my family, and the honest answer is that nobody was purely wrong and nobody was purely right. My mother spent 30 years building something real in medicine. My father spent his career watching people make promises they couldn't keep. When they looked at me and saw a 22-year-old with a part-time job and an app that made $400 a month, they were looking through the lens of everything they'd learned. I understand that now in a way I couldn't then. But understanding something doesn't mean accepting it without question. What I keep coming back to is this. The choice I made wasn't reckless. I had studied the problem. I had 11 real users before I ever had that confrontation in the kitchen. I had a working product and a clear thesis. It wasn't a fantasy. It was early stage work, and early stage work looks like nothing from the outside for a very long time. My parents couldn't see what I was building because they didn't know how to look at it. That's not cruelty. That's a failure of imagination. And it happens in every generation, in every family that has ever had someone go in a direction nobody expected. The part that cost all of us something real was the ultimatum. Not because ultimatums are always wrong. Sometimes they're necessary. But the one my mother gave me had no room in it for the possibility that she might be mistaken. That kind of certainty is its own kind of blindness. And it left us both standing on opposite sides of a wall that took years to come down. What I learned, and I mean genuinely learned, not performed for the sake of sounding wise, is that integrity isn't a comfortable thing to carry. There were months when I was building in Durham where I questioned everything, not just the app. My judgment, my stubbornness, whether I'd made a mistake I was too proud to admit. Petra used to sit in my living room on Sunday afternoons, not saying much, just being present, and that was more valuable than any advice anyone gave me during that stretch. Intelligence will only take you so far when you're rebuilding something from scratch. What carries you through the middle part, the part nobody sees, is character. The decision to keep showing up for the thing you believe in, even when the people you love have decided it's not worth believing in. And then there's what happened with my parents when the wall finally came down. My father saying, proud, like he had to push it through something to get it out. My mother taking my arm on the sidewalk in Asheville and saying 6 words she meant completely. Those moments didn't undo the hard years, but they were real. That's the thing about people. They can change, slowly, when the evidence becomes impossible to argue with. Not everyone does, but some do. And if you've maintained your own integrity through the long stretch, you're in a position to actually receive it when they come back. I didn't win because my app sold. I didn't prove anything to anyone by buying a house with old oak trees out front. What I kept, through all of it, was the ability to look at myself squarely and know that I had not let someone else's doubt become my reality. That's the only thing that was ever actually mine to protect.